A curse stole every voice in the land, and the only one who could save them was the boy who had never heard a single sound. The village of Oluwa-Mbe had once lived in a world made of music. During festivals, drums shook the sky, flutes wove through the air like dancing birds, and every night carried its own chorus of laughter and song. But one morning, without warning, everything changed. A devastating stillness rolled across the land like a dark wave. Babies opened their mouths, and no cries came out. Hunters pounded the ground, and no thud followed. The wind passed through the trees without a whisper. A curse of absolute silence had swallowed the village whole. Panic struck first, then fear, then despair. The elders tried ancient rituals, the priests burnt sacred herbs, and the healers pounded their palms against drums that had suddenly become hollow and useless. Nothing worked. The entire world felt dead. No vibration, no rhythm, no breath of sound. But among them was Adamu, a 12-year-old boy who had been deaf since birth. The silence that tormented everyone else felt strangely familiar to him. He moved through the quiet village, watching the others cry soundlessly, watching their lips tremble with words that never came. He could see the terror in their eyes, the helplessness in their bodies. But inside himself, he felt something different. A calm, a clarity. He was not frightened by a silence he had lived with all his life. When the elders gathered to find someone brave enough to journey to Mount Ojú-Ọ, the mountain that ate voices, not a single hand rose. How could they face a mountain known for swallowing sound itself when they could no longer make a single noise? The mountain housed the mythical drum of echoes, the only relic that could restore their voices. But many who had gone seeking it had never returned. Adamu stepped forward. His foster grandmother, old Mama Nkem, tried to pull him back, shaking her head violently, mouthing, "No, my child, no!" But Adamu knelt, touched the earth, and wrote with his finger in the dust, "I am not afraid of silence." The villagers stared at him, some in shock, some in shame, some in awe, and before they had time to object, Adamu slung a leather satchel across his shoulder and began the long walk toward the mountain. The path to Mount Ojú-Ọ twisted through wild lands where hunters, in ordinary times, relied on sound to survive, listening for growls, footsteps, or rustling leaves. But now everything was mute. Adamu walked with a keen awareness, feeling faint vibrations through the soles of his feet. Without sound, the earth's heartbeat became sharper to him. It pulsed softly beneath him, guiding him forward. He reached the forest of drowned whispers as dusk settled in. The trees loomed tall and ancient, their trunks carved with faded symbols of warning. Vines dangled like strands of forgotten spirits. At the base of an enormous iroko tree, he found a carved message. "He who enters without a voice shall leave without a soul." Most would have turned back, but Adamu had never possessed a voice to begin with. He touched the carving, took a steady breath, and stepped deeper into the forest. Shadows slithered between trees, ghostly shapes of travelers lost long ago, their mouths twisted in eternal, silent screams. The air thickened, pressing against him like invisible hands. But Adamu focused on movement, not sound. He watched the patterns in the branches, the shift of light against the ground, and walked like someone who had spent his whole life reading the world through his eyes and skin instead of his ears. When the forest finally thinned, the mountain stood before him, gigantic and ominous. Mount Ojú-Ọ looked like a colossal creature frozen mid-roar. The entrance to its cave opened like a mouth, jagged and hungry. Adamu pressed his palm to the stone beside the entrance. A deep, heavy vibration traveled through his arm. The mountain was alive. Inside, the cave was a world of glowing mushrooms and winding tunnels. Crystals jutted from the walls like the teeth of giants. The silence inside was even deeper, so deep It felt like stepping into the lungs of a sleeping beast. Adamu moved slowly, touching the walls, the floor, letting the faintest tremors guide him. At a fork, he sensed a heartbeat-like rhythm pulsing through the ground to his right. He followed it. The cave air grew colder. Then shapes began to form, ghostly figures drifting out of the darkness. These were the spirits of sound swallowed long ago, their forms made of shimmering, rippling air. They floated toward Adamu, their faces twisted with longing, their fingers reaching for him. Though he could not hear them, he felt the tremors of their pain vibrating through the cave. Adamu lowered himself to the floor, pressed both hands flat against the cold stone, and focused on the rhythm he had been following. His fingers tapped the ground, soft, steady beats. Tap, 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 tap. The spirits halted. The rhythm calmed them, soothed them like a lullaby they had almost forgotten. Slowly they faded back into the cave walls, leaving the path open. Adamu rose and continued until the tunnel opened into an enormous underground chamber filled with light from glowing crystals. At the center stood the Drum of Echoes, a massive drum taller than a man, wide as a hut. Its surface glowed faintly, like the skin of a full moon. Adamu stepped closer. The drum pulsed with energy, sending waves of vibration into his fingertips. It felt alive, ancient, longing to be played. He placed both hands on it. A sudden jolt shot up his arms, flooding him with sensations, rhythms like rolling thunder, tremors like distant storms, echoes of songs lost to time. He understood then what he needed to do. To break the curse, someone had to offer their voice to awaken the drum. But Adamu had no voice to sacrifice. Then a realization washed over him. Silence was his voice, and he could give it freely. He lifted both hands and struck the drum. Boom! He did not hear it, but the vibration blasted through the cavern like an earthquake. He struck again, harder, and again. The cave began shaking violently. Crystals exploded into shards of sparkling light. For the first time in centuries, sound, raw, primal, hungry, burst out of the mountain in waves. Trapped voices erupted all around him. Laughter, sobs, screams, chants. Every swallowed sound roared back to life, slamming into the cave like a storm of memories. Adamu stood firm, beating the drum with everything he had, even as tears streamed down his face and the very ground trembled beneath him. Then, with one final, mighty strike, a blinding light filled the chamber, and the drum released a shockwave so powerful it hurled Adamu backward. When he opened his eyes, he was lying outside the mountain. Morning sunlight warmed his skin. Birds flew overhead, and although he could not hear them, he felt the air vibrating with their cries. The curse was broken. As he limped back toward Oluwa-Mbe, he saw villagers rushing toward him, their mouths opened, not in silent panic this time, but in shouts of joy he could feel deep in his chest. They lifted him high, spinning him in the air, tears streaking down their faces. Mama Nkum cupped his cheeks, speaking words he could not hear, but felt completely. "My son, you saved us." That night, for the first time in weeks, the village drums thundered again. Music shook the skies, laughter wrapped around the fires, and voices soared like birds released from cages. And though Adamu could not hear any of it, he felt every beat, each one a reminder that the boy who had lived in silence had returned with the power of 1,000 voices. The village would never forget him. The world would never forget him. And the mountains would forever echo with the rhythm of the boy who saved sound.